Hello, beautiful beings. So today I want to talk about the Magdalene Wounds. The wounds that were inflicted upon Mary Magdalene when she was embodied and incarnated as a human, here to spread the message of the divine feminine and to carry the Christ light alongside Jesus Christ, Yeshua, her beloved, her partner. And so the three Magdalene wounds, the core Magdalene wounds that the feminine carries, the collective feminine carries, that we get to heal within ourselves in order to heal within the collective, are the whore, the bitch, and the witch. So the first core wound, the whore, relates to our sexuality. It relates to our sexual expression, the desirability that comes with being a feminine being who is empowered in her sovereign sexuality. So this also brings us to the archetype of the high priestess, which Mary Magdalene was a rose priestess. And that priestess energy is very connected to source and sexuality. And sacred sexuality in the ancient times, where goddess worship was very prevalent, that is definitely making a comeback and has always been something that has been happening, just more under the radar. And this is the rise of the divine feminine, is the remembrance of these codes, of this goddess energy, of this divine feminine mother, creatrix, queen, bad bitch energy that is rising. And it's really powerful. So understanding these wounds also helps understand maybe the blueprint of your incarnation here, the human experience that you've had here as a woman, and how this might pertain to you. So the first wound is the whore wound. So as many of you know, Mary Magdalene was known as a prostitute, and she was known as a sinner. She was remembered as a sinner who had to be cleared of her 7 demons, and now she's revered as a saint, and she actually has a feast day on July 22nd where she is honored as a saint. So this also brings us to the recognition that we are everything, my loves. We are saint and sinner. We are, the sacred prostitute and the holy virgin, right? These are all energies that we carry. And so going back to the whore and Mary Magdalene being known as the prostitute. So some say that was not true. I have been reading a book called Sacred Sexuality by, Sacred Sexuality by George Forstein. And in it, there's a chapter on sacred sexuality, talking about sacred prostitution, and that the temple harlots, the prostitutes at these temples, were worshiping the goddess. So all of it was done in devotion to the goddess. So there were different brothels and places where men would go for prostitution. There would be one that was more, more ego-driven, and then there was the other one that was the men who wanted to touch and taste the great mystery, the divine mystery, through the portal of the feminine, because it was recognized that the feminine was the portal for the divine. So these women were in devotion to the goddess, and the men who would come would sit there as the women would do this whole ritual where they were dancing and inviting the man in, and also inviting the divine and the divine feminine to move through them, to bless the men through their body, to please the men through their body. Now, of course, it wasn't this whole divine sacred thing in all aspects, in all realms, but I do think that touches on a very, very important part of women's sexuality and the power of it. And of this whole misconception of the sacred prostitute. To me, the archetype of the sacred prostitute is a woman in her power, in her sacred sensuality, sexuality, in her sovereignty, who is a source and portal for divination, for the divine, to move through her while she's having sex, and to activate the divinity within the partner that she's having sex with. Now, this does not mean getting paid for your body, right? But it's the energy of the sacred prostitute that is really important to weave back into the fabric of our consciousness, in the sense that it reestablishes sexuality as the sacred portal that it is to the divine. And as women, we get to be that sacred portal for whoever we choose to enter our temple. And to be very clear on that energy. So right now there is a mass awakening of this sacredness of sexuality, and women coming back into their power as sovereign, sensual, sexual, creatrix, queen, multidimensional beings. And part of this is really reclaiming your sexuality for you. So being sovereign and whole unto yourself, and really connecting with this energy for you, not using this energy to court or to manipulate, but as an extension of your own divinity and an invitation into deeper divinity for whoever you choose to share that energy with, because it is very sacred. So before I had my awakenings, I was very much in my wounded feminine, and I would use sex to manipulate and to court people, and it was manipulative and controlling, and I was manifesting from a very egoic place of wanting to prove that I could get certain men's attention or validation or whatever. Now my sensuality and my sexuality is completely for me. And I have done a lot of deprogramming and reconditioning to come to this space where I can be very sovereign unto myself. And this is also what I teach women. I have a course coming out called Rose Gold Alchemy, where we start to work with all of these core wounds and the principles and archetypes of the feminine, so that you can come into this sovereignty with yourself and lead from this space of empowerment in your own life, in every area of your life. And a lot of that has to do with reclaiming your sexuality, reconditioning the beliefs that you have around your sexuality. Maybe you grew up in a religious environment and family, and you felt shame around your sexuality. And on the flip side of that, maybe you were tapped into your sexuality, and you didn't know how to harness or utilize or be responsible with the power of it, because it's so powerful, and it can almost be intoxicatingly powerful if you don't know how to harness and channel that energy in a healthy way, in a way that's conducive to your well-being and to the well-being of other people. So yeah, growing up and in my teenage years, I was very irresponsible with my sexuality, and I have always been very connected to this energy, but I was really not being responsible with it, and it caused a lot of damage. And so a big part of my spiritual journey has been healing this whore wound. I had a big reputation of being a whore, of being a slut. I internalized it. I had my own father telling me that when I was 15, I would probably end up pregnant, and I ran with it. I was like, okay, this is who you think I am? Whatever. I'm just going to own all of me. And it was destructive. And so healing that whore wound and reclaiming the sacred prostitute, reclaiming the sacred whore for you, choosing when you want to express that energy or share that energy with the person, whether that be a man or a woman, is so vital to your embodiment as a divine feminine being, as a feminine being. If you want to heal this relationship with the sacred feminine and embody it so that you can be a part of the collective restoration and healing of the sacred feminine. So that's the first wound, is the whore wound. I could go so deep into that, but we're just going to cover the basics here. The second wound is the bitch. And the bitch relates to relationships and to the way that you show up in the world. And so for many women, it's almost ingrained that we should be submissive or subservient or obedient, right? So if we're outspoken or in our power or really claiming all of ourselves, we can be seen as a bitch for speaking our truth, for being honest, for being, self-assured. And this wound starts to stifle our ability to show up powerfully in the full expressions we are as the feminine. Because yes, there are parts of the feminine where we get to be submissive and we get to, if we want to, not because there's a narrative or a belief that we should be that way or an expectation from a man that we should be that way. It's our choice to be submissive or to allow another person to take a lead like the masculine if we feel safe with the masculine. And that goes into a whole other thing about cultivating the divine masculine within ourselves so that we can hold that space and start to create this inner alchemy, this sacred union within, so that we attract our reciprocal, so that we can actually do this dance in the external too, but it all starts within. And it starts with really healing these core Magdalene wounds. So the bitch refers to, it refers to our self-assuredness and it can start to really erode our self-confidence if we are really internalizing this wound, or maybe these stories of us being a bitch or being called a bitch or too bossy in the past. Now, just like with the whore wound, with sexuality, this energy of the bitch, which really is just being in your power, right? It's like the bitch is the shadow aspect of the light of the reality of it, which is being in your power as a woman, is, maybe being outspoken and speaking your truth and standing in the truth of who you are and not being afraid that if you do that, right? Because this is how this wound manifests, that if you do that, if you do stand in the truth of who you are, if you are unwavering in your power as a woman, then you might scare off your man, or your man might not be able to keep up with you, or people might not be able to keep up with you, or you might be too powerful for them, right? And these are all stories that have been adopted and ingrained in us because we were persecuted or ostracized or shamed for being in our power. Because women, for the longest time, were not supposed to be powerful or outspoken. We were supposed to be soft and just look pretty and, be submissive to our men. And no, we get to do all of that. Those are archetypes that we get to play with, but because we want to, because we are sovereign and whole unto ourselves, and we are choosing that. So reclaiming that and healing the bitch wound allows you to come into your power as a woman, to stand firmly in it, to stand firmly in your sovereignty. So these two wounds are about reclaiming your sexuality and reclaiming your sovereignty. Now, the third wound is the witch wound. The witch wound is a very deep wound because, as we know with the Salem witch trials, there were 1 million, probably more than that, women who were burned at the stake for being witches. So, to me, right, all of this is take what you want and leave with the rest. This is my personal truth. This is what's coming through my vessel, and this is what I feel called to share. It may not all resonate with you. Maybe not all of this is, can be fact-checked or whatever, but this is what I believe to be true. Witches are healers. Witches are oracles. Witches are the women that are really in touch with their intuition and who follow it. The wild women who are attuned to nature and the cycles of the moon, who honor their blood and their bleeding and their moon cycle, right? Your menstruation, your moon cycle, because it's in tune with the cycles of the moon. The days of your menstruation are aligned with the days of the moon cycles. So being in your healing the witch wound is really allowing yourself to honor your intuition and your own gifts and psychic abilities as a woman. Because as a woman, you are connected to the eternal. You are connected to spirit, to source, to the divine. And as women, we have a really, really deep connection with the earth and with the moon. So this is also why I host monthly full moon circles, and sometimes I do them for the new moon too, so that women can come together and start to honor their sensuality, their sovereignty, and their intuition, and to connect with the different cycles of the moon. Because when we start to connect with the cycles of the moon and the energy of the zodiac of whatever the moon is moving through, we are starting to tune into our deeper ancient wisdom. And also, when we start to tune into and align and track our menstruation, we're tuning into the cosmic primordial womb that is within us, that is also connected to the womb of all creation. So that is a whole other video on sacred menstruation, how to work with sacred menstruation and your moon cycle to honor your whole entire life. You can literally set up your whole life around your moon cycle so that you know when you have the most energy, when you are in hibernation mode, when you need to, create and just be internal. Because a lot of women don't realize that our intuition is so strong and so connected to our hormones and to our cycles. Like we bleed every month, and that bleeding, that shedding is a release. And if we're in tune with it, we can really utilize that time of our bleeding as a very sacred time. I remember there was a time where I used to hate getting my period, and now I love it. I look forward to it. I thank God, Goddess for it. I love it. I love my moon time because I get to just really tune deeply and feel my own womb and connect with her and ask her what she needs, what she wants. And then it's also such a potent time for creation and introspection and just really getting clear on what it is you do want to release and releasing it. So going back to the witch wound, these are practices that women were burned at the stakes for practicing, for sharing. These are, the healing arts, the psychic arts, the ability to be intuitive was seen as witchy. So a lot of what's happening in this divine feminine awakening movement, the rising of the sacred feminine, is reclaiming the witch wound. And that also takes some time, because if you've had past lives where you've been persecuted or, burned or beaten or turned on by your sisters for being a witch and turned in, right, where you would get stoned, or they would tie you up and throw you in the river to see if you would float. And if you floated, you were a witch. But if you drowned, you weren't a witch, but you died. So it's like either way, you were still being killed for and persecuted for being connected to your feminine power. So there is so much that has been left in the dark and so much that is still being revealed. And we get to heal this within ourselves, so that we are healing the collective feminine that has been oppressed and in the dark for way too long. So, yes, this is all a beautiful homecoming, and healing these core Magdalene wounds is a big part of this divine feminine awakening. And, there's probably a lot of this that you can relate to as a woman, and realizing, that it is a part of this process of reclamation that's happening globally right now. And if diving deeper into all of this does interest you, reach out to me. I have a course called Rose Gold Alchemy coming out soon that I'm really excited to share with you all, where we dive deeper into all of these wounds and into archetypal embodiment and different embodiment practices, and just getting you more deeply connected to your own sacred feminine and your sovereignty. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. I hope this was helpful for you. Yeah, the divine feminine is rising, and it is so beautiful, and also can be very challenging at times to reclaim these aspects of the feminine that have been so shamed or shunned or persecuted in so much of our human earthly experience. So keep leaning in, beautiful heart warrior goddesses, and I love you. Mwah.